like the biggest lesson that continues to inform the way that we think about money management within our company is to not throw money at problems, and spending your way to growth and then, burning out along the way certainly doesn't get you to where you want to be in terms of final destination and a really positive outcome. But I also saw how powerful it was to build really endearing consumer brands and lead with a heartbeat.
We're live, Terri. Thank you for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate you being on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we chatted. We had you on the newsletter. I checked. I think it was almost exactly a year ago.
I had just had my daughter, so I was on that hormone high, and my answers might look and feel a little different a year later.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see. I mean, I'm sure a lot has happened over the last year.
Yes, it has.
All right. Well, we can kind of get into it. So before, we go into all the questions and everything, maybe give the people just kind of a quick highlight of who you are, the company, and just what you do.
Yeah. So I come from a long line of startups in terms of my professional trajectory, but just generally like really obsessed with consumer brands and building equity with communities and consumers that are really passionate about things. Those things have been working out, they've been sleeping, and they've been dogs. And so I've had some of these really cool experiences getting in at early stages and seeing companies go through these incredible growth journeys, and became really inspired to become an entrepreneur because as a consumer, I found a lot of frustration specifically within the pet food category. And so that served really as the main inspiration for starting Jinx. And at Jinx, we offer a line of clean label products. So we've got clean label commitments to our consumers and our end consumers, where we have these formulations that are really proportionally appropriate for the dog, that have high quality ingredients that you don't have to Google, and are easy to serve and store from the consumer perspective. And so our vision from the very start has been to elevate the way that pet parents, specifically modern pet parents, care for their animals with purposeful products that don't break your wallet.
Yeah, at this point, we've spoken to a bunch of people that have started pet food companies, whether it's gently cooked, raw, kibble, everything under the sun. And it seems like everyone started it from a pain point, like, oh, my dog had this problem, my dog was sick, it's just, how bad was the dog food, up until maybe 10, 15 years ago, that all these people just decided, hey, we have to do something better because the current status quo of dog food is just let's just say bad.
Yeah. To put it nicely. I mean, listen, the landscape is dominated by really big CPG companies that also make sugary cereals and candy, right? And so I think the mentality just to produce something at scale with a ton of volume was really just checking the boxes, and it was working for a really long time. And then we've gone through what I think are really beautiful evolutions regarding our relationships with our pets. And so, they've moved from pets to companions to family members. And I certainly treat my dogs like family members. And so it's been really nice to see those relationships kind of evolve and flourish. And alongside that comes this responsibility that we have to choose something for our pets that cannot choose for themselves, and wearing that responsibility to make them as happy and as healthy as possible. I think most pet parents take pretty seriously. And so our standards have just risen in terms of wanting to buy with brands who are transparent, who know what they're doing. We're using science-backed approach to, create these destinations where consumers can shop and trust what they're buying.
One of the things I love about your background too, Terri, and what I think Roy and I discussed this, that we're loving this in the pet revolution, if you want to call it that, is there's been basically up until probably, like Roy was saying, the last 10 to 15 years, it's been a lot of people who've been in the pet industry for a very, very long time, who were at the helm of a lot of these companies and businesses. And it's oh, well, it's working. We're selling product. It's, people love it. They don't know any better. And then it was just a lot of outsiders, right? So it's people who have come from different worlds, experience that pain point, and bring a lot of that expertise and capability through messaging, through more modern means of marketing, and then porting that over into the pet space. And it's worked so well with people doing that. And I think it's something that this industry, it's a big reason why I think Roy and I both started really kind of talking about it and covering it, because there are so many, from pet food to vet services to all the other things that we have traditionally done, grooming, boarding. There's been a lot of antiquation in that. And so bringing in some of these like fresh choices, people had never heard of air dried. People never thought about freeze dried or fresh, or, they've done it at home themselves. And so it's really cool to see folks like yourself come in and offer these new solutions, because I think this, like, we're very firm believers, like that's what's going to take to really kind of, pet industry can be a big laggard in a lot of ways. And so like to push that forward. And I think that linchpin moment, like you mentioned, was the jump from, oh, yeah, this is my pup, to like, no, this is essentially another family member in the house. And like, if I'm eating, I'm not going to eat the same meal every day. And it's definitely not going to be a homogeneous color. Neither should my pets. And so I think that's something that I'm really excited that folks like yourself are getting in the space and tackling those problems.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, listen, I think that it's actually like a pretty cool thing to build a brand as the consumer. I think when you see brands that show up and feel really authentic, it's clear to me that they are founded by someone with a heartbeat who understands consumer challenges and frustrations and are looking for solutions that are becoming more and more attainable. And ultimately, easy to buy, easy to store, easy to feed, good for who you care about. So yeah, I think everything is, kind of defined by that criteria as we even think about just growing our brand and our product portfolio and designing an innovation roadmap.
I think with you, it's very interesting because the majority of, like I said, the pain points and the founders that started the companies, it's like, well, they looked at, what was just a standard, which was kibble. And they're like, well, this is not working for my dog. Let me try to, maybe I'll do raw. Maybe I'll do gently cooked, freeze dried, all the different options. But I remember last year you were saying in the interview that 90% of consumers are still buying kibble. So first of all, I'm interested in the past year, has that number shifted at all, up, down, whatever? And then why you decided like, hey, like I'm going to go into this extremely difficult category, like you said, dominated by a few massive corporations, and I'm just going to kind of reinvent the wheel and do something, do a better for you product in this category.
Sure. So the pet ownership stats are rising, right? So the last one that I read as Q1 closed was there's 1 billion pets, domestic pets worldwide. That's a lot, right? I would say like dog ownership trends are flat, and then cat is growing. And so that's doing some really interesting things within the category regarding trends by species. All of that to say, especially as we have this kind of like macroeconomic volatility, people are looking for value-oriented brands. And then the other thing that's happening is people are hybrid feeding. So they're not necessarily just feeding kibble or just feeding fresh. They're mixing things together and they're making meals. And again, I think this comes from this evolution of the relationship that we have with our pets. I shop for grass-fed beef. I know why that would be better for my dog than a meat byproduct, right? And so I'm gravitating towards brands that look and sound like the brands that I buy for myself, where I have really high standards and I want really high quality food. And so with that, I think that formats continue to shift, albeit slightly. Kibble is still the largest within the food category. So we're serving the largest addressable market. But I think, the way to drive optimization there is just superior product and designing something with a formulation that's better for the animal and still tastes great and doesn't break your wallet. And so that's what we continue to do is we just optimize our product portfolio. But we are introducing new food formats because this idea of putting toppers in or adding sauce or adding supplements because, I've got two really big German Shepherd mixes and they are known for having joint problems. So I add an extra something to their bowls every morning so that we solve for that problem and hopefully avoid it as they age. So I think that this idea of kind of like making a meal for your dog is really cool. And we're trying to build out this portfolio where we have more ownership of the pantry. The consumer can buy with a single brand in many destinations, but a single brand, knowing that all of those products work together and you can feed them something that is a single format, or you can mix things together and it's not going to be it's not going to be disruptive to the digestive system. And really, like, it solves for most cases as it relates to looking for a clean label food for your pet.
Yeah, I think that's great. You touched on a lot of great things there that I kind of want to double click on. And like starting with like you mentioned, like this is the largest TAM in the pet industry, so therefore it's invited a lot of new players. And there's a lot of players that I think are definitely smaller, medium, and some of them are pretty big that are kind of tackling the same kind of initiatives, right? Like transparency, sustainability, convenience, like the user interface and everything is totally updated and makes it, like you said, mimics like the same thing if I were buying something for myself. And so I think there's definitely a lot of players doing that, and Jinx is one of them, and it has immaculate branding. Like the website's incredible, the imagery, the user flow, it's really, really good. And I love that you're also tackling it like from a market differentiation standpoint. Like not everybody can just continue to go down the product line and become this like, 360 one-stop shop for everything dog related. But like outside of that, so outside of the expansion through, supplements, toppers, other things of that nature, what would you say are like your key differentiators, again, outside of the things that we talked about that I think a lot of other people are doing? Like, what are other things that you think that Jinx is unique to, like, to gain that market edge, to kind of cut through to the consumer? Or just like, what leverages are you pulling, or levers are you pulling, excuse me, to kind of make sure that you're cutting through the noise as this becomes a very saturated market?
Sure. So we launched the company about 6 years ago. We incorporated the company 6 years ago. We launched the company 5 years ago. We've been in retail for 3 years. I will say through that journey, like, we've always shown up with modern positioning. What I found to be really fascinating was, like, you walk down these dog food aisles and you see like bears catching fish out of streams, or like opals on the front of a pack, and you're just like, wow, like my dog gets beat up by my cat, or like he couldn't catch a fly if his meal depended on it. And so there's like these really unrelatable brands with these versions of dogs that existed decades ago. And so what we wanted to celebrate was this idea of being like really relatable, in the sense that because we treat our pets like family members, we want to hero them and really kind of like expand on what that relationship looks like. So, I mean, my dogs are like laying at my feet right now, but if there was a piece of furniture in my office, they'd be on the furniture with like their head on a pillow. Or, if the cat was in here, he'd be bossing them around. And so they just changed and it just evolved. And I think a lot of consumers can relate to that. We've prioritized our pets in a much different way, and what we're willing to spend to keep them happy, to keep them exercised, to keep them comfortable, to keep them groomed well, is almost like there's no ceiling to that. And so I really think that seeing something that looks and feels and sounds a lot more like that was really important to the way that we thought about bringing this brand identity to life. And that translates through packaging, it translates through color, it translates through photography, and it translates through messaging. And so that modern position has really been something specific to the kibble category, or this dry main meal category, that I think has really helped us stand out amongst those brands that just feel like they were designed 2 to 3 decades ago, and we're holding on to this image or idea of dog that isn't necessarily as relevant anymore. And then we've created a really trusted product. So the beauty of launching this brand in the pandemic was we launched through a direct-to-consumer model, and that allowed us to have this 360-degree relationship with the consumer and collect a ton of feedback. And so we put a product into the world. We knew it was going to need optimization. And so as we surveyed our consumers, as we listened to comments and emails, and as we jumped on the phone and asked like how things were going as they were transitioning from One Food to Jinx, we took copious notes and we continued to focus on this like maniacal optimization of our product. And so I feel like we've landed in a really good place. And objectively speaking, when we design or optimize any formulation, it goes straight into testing. And if we are not competing or beating the biggest brands in the space, it doesn't go on a bag and it doesn't go on the shelf. And that's from like a digestibility, palatability, and stool quality perspective. And so we know that we have this trusted product that is oftentimes superior to the brands that we sit alongside in retail or on digital shelves. And that goes a long way, right? Like if you stop feeding your dog one thing, start feeding them something different, and their coat looks better, and their stool's more firm and easy to pick up, and their eyes are more clear, and their energy's more regulated, you're like, okay, like there's something better about this, even if I can't put my finger on it. So I think that trust goes a really long way with the consumer. And then the other two components are we're in the right channels. And so you guys know the category really well. Most brands, especially new ones, they don't launch digitally through kind of like the D2C or subscription model. Then they start in the really small channels like independent, neighborhood, pet, and then they scale through specialty. Sometimes they make it into mass, into club. Most times they don't because they built credibility in those smaller channels. We bypassed all of those smaller independent channels and went straight to Walmart. And so our distribution strategy as we started entering retail was anchoring to the largest retailer in the world. Walmart sells over 30% of pet food in North America. And so if you think about just getting like a slice of that, it's pretty material. They're also one of the few retailers, brick and mortar retailers, that continue to grow in this category despite some of the macroeconomic headwinds and deceleration trends as it relates to pet ownership. And so I think that we chose right in terms of finding a retailer who was really aligned with our mission, who wanted to put something better on the shelves and grow the category together with a much smaller brand. And then from there, we've continued to focus on mass, food, club, and e-commerce channels. So really like all of the retail formats that are still growing in this category. And then the last piece, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I think it's really important, is having an aspirational brand at an attainable price point is really, really important. And I think it becomes increasingly important as we go through these waves of inflation, as, you know, we're trying to figure out what this impending tariff situation is going to mean for our wallets. And so having something that communicates credibility and trust and value is incredibly important. And then the fact that it doesn't break your wallet, I think consumers really appreciate that. Like we all wish we could afford private chefs to cook every meal for our dogs every day. But the reality of that is like, it's not going to happen, at least like not
For some
not
people.
for me. For some people, right? The 1%, but like, what about the 99%, right? That we're really focused on solving for. And so I've got two big dogs. I think I've mentioned this, but like over 100 pounds, German Shepherd, Akita mixes. If I tried to feed them farmer's dog or even an air dried option, I'd spend more on one dog than I would on my entire family for groceries per month. Like most people just are not in a position to do that. And we recognize that, and we have a really relentless focus on communicating the value and the benefits through a price point that most people can afford. And in these channels where they're shopping, right? Like your Walmarts, your Targets, your Sam's Clubs, your Costco's, people are accomplishing their entire grocery list in these retail environments. Or Chewy and Amazon, right? Like you don't want to lug a 30-pound bag of dog food home and can show up on your doorstep. That's what I opt for. But the channel mix is important. The price point is important. The trust and transparency is necessary. And then the positioning, I feel like, is just what resonates most with the modern consumer.
There's 2 points that I wanted as you were talking, I was thinking one was obviously the hilarious. Every bag, if you go into PetSmart or Petco, wherever you buy, it's all the same, right? It's like the wolf, the bear. It's like your dog on like a cliff, just overlooking the horizon. And it's just like, dude, my dog sleeps 22 hours a day and couldn't catch a rabbit if it meant that it would save her life. Like, this is not like, it's just so funny that has been the standard for so long. And now we're seeing also, like, there's no differentiation. Like, when you're walking down the thing, it all looks very, very similar. You're like, I don't know what's what, they all show it's all wolves. And then now it's like, it's bright colors. It's, maybe like a little goofy dog. It's just like, it's different where at least it stands out. And you're like, oh, okay, like there's options. So I love that that's kind of happening right now. And then the second is, it seems like you're almost revolutionary in the sense of when everyone is going a certain path and then you're doing something different, meaning like everyone is trying to go D2C. Everyone is trying to go, gently cooked, all these different technologies, something that's new, raw, gently cooked, freeze dried, etc. You're like, I'm actually going to go, into retail. I'm actually going to go into kibble. I'm going to do the opposite of what kind of all the trends are going into, but I'm just going to do it differently. I'm going to do it better. And, when everyone's going one way and you're swinging the other way as a startup, not necessarily as a big corporation, that's pretty cool. That's kind of going against the current.
Yeah, you know what? I think my co-founders and I have always been like the zaggers, right? Like if everyone is zigging, like we like to zag. And because we were building a brand that solved for our own personal frustrations as dog parents, I think we got a lot of things right. Like it was about what works for these three very different dogs owned by three very different pet parents. And can we create something that like also works for most dogs, regardless of age, of breed? And really like that, I think, is the energy that made this thing break out the way that it did. And then like, listen, if I'm being really honest, like another huge part of this is just like being agile. Like we also launched through direct to consumer, which benefited greatly from all of the demand that surged during the pandemic. And then we quickly realized it was a really volatile channel and trying to navigate a world where your customer acquisition costs are all over the place and LTVs are really unpredictable. It doesn't necessarily set you up for like a long, sustainable and predictable business. And so we had to figure out like, how are we going to pivot even though all of our expertise was built in digitally native brands and companies. And with that, like we started to pick our head up and became really acute that doors were going to reopen at some point, lights were going to go back on, and people were going to be back in the store buying most of their grocery list. And so you have to kind of also like move as you see trends start to, not so much trends, but behaviors start to emerge or start to be restated in some bread. And we've just really tried to pay attention first as consumers and dog parents, but then also as people who are running a business with what I think is like a really lofty vision of becoming the single destination that most modern pet parents want to shop with because they trust us and we're in the right spaces at an affordable price point.
And then one more thing, and then I'm sure Tom's got a bunch of questions. So last year when we spoke, off the top of my head, I think the number was 7,500 doors, right? That you guys were in. First of all, what number is it now? Then second, that's not an easy task to accomplish within, 3 years, 75, and you got all the big box stores, the Walmarts, etc. How did you do it? And like, how can other companies, if they want to copy that, how do they go approach the buyer? What are some things that they're looking for? Like, how do they do that?
Sure. So we're in just over 10,000 brick and mortar doors, but then we also have pretty significant footprints in Chewy and Amazon. And so this ranges from like Walmart to Whole Foods. And why I bring that up is because the label is clean enough to live on a Whole Foods shelf, but it can also be in a Walmart or a Target or a Tractor Supply. We also have a pretty good presence in major regional grocery chains, and we continue to focus on expansion in those areas as well. So that's kind of the mix. It's like we're growing distribution in the most attractive channels, which are also growing within the category. So when you think about just like leaning into where the momentum is and where people are shopping, that's like a key part of why we're winning. And then I would say, like, listen, we hustled a lot to figure out like who we wanted to launch with in terms of our anchor retail partnerships. Started with Walmart, launched Chewy shortly thereafter, and then have been pretty selectively figuring out the right spaces that make sense for our product assortment and our consumer, kind of on a case by case basis. But I would say we've just turned this corner where I think because we are showing up in independent third-party panel data and Nielsen reports, everyone who purchases those things can see our household penetration growing. I think Jinx and Freshpet are really like the bright spots in these channels in terms of growth. Every other brand is flat to down. And so when you see that as a retailer, it's like, I want to know more, right? I want to hear more about that brand and want to know why it's working. And then I need to grow my categories. So that feels like a really interesting brand to bring in and test, or bring in and replace what's not working or what's decelerating. And so, before we've been pretty proactive in terms of sales outreach and just talking to these retailers and understanding everything from what the distribution could look like and the points of distribution could look like through the margin profiles. And now there's a lot more people knocking on our door, which feels really nice, but you still have to kind of qualify them as being like the right partner to launch this product with, because productivity matters. And we don't want to go through the expense of using our resources to get in new doors that, are either losing share or don't have the shoppers that are going to be compelled to buy our product and then fail, right? And like not be able to move that product. And so we're becoming, I would say like pretty selective about where we show up, but it's always a mix of like what is happening, what is growing, and where do retailers ultimately have an appetite to place a bet on a new brand. And, there's a lot of kind of compelling storytelling that can happen when you're talking directly to the brand. But I think like really like the industry data and the category data speaks for itself.
It's incredible the distribution that y'all have built up and managed, and that momentum that's carried over into so many, like 10,000 doors. That's insane. So it was like D2C to build trust, loyalty. Like you were uniquely positioned, and I'm sure the other founders, coming from that same revolution we saw with the Caspers, the Allbirds, all of that, right? With the consumer side of things and everything being streamlined, looking different, looking new, looking fresh, taking some boring categories and making them really exciting. And so you had that understanding, applied it to the pet space, like you mentioned before. And that really kind of got you the brand awareness, the trust, the loyalty, the differentiation, which is great. And then you basically use that as a springboard into get a lot of other places. So going back to that D2C channel, how important is that in the mix now? And is it, I know it's still a viable thing, but like, is that dwindling? Is that, how is that playing into the overall offering that you guys are providing?
The short answer is less. It's playing less of a role. And that is because you've got the consumer that wants to shop online and buy their pet products at a single destination and have them show up on their doorstep. They're shopping with Chewy or they're shopping with Amazon. And so being in those spaces and figuring out how to build out the right credibility and consumer loyalty within those environments has a lot more upside than trying to figure out how to focus on like CRO, so revenue optimization on our website, or to carve out significant chunks of our marketing budget to focus on traffic acquisition to thinkjinx.com, and then really kind of like get them to bundle up a bunch of products, put them on a recurring purchase cycle, and then continue to fulfill those orders. And so it still exists, but our business flipped from being like 90% direct to consumer in 2021 to like less than 5% of our revenue mix in 2024. So just to show you the shift and ultimately the power of retail, it really obviously allows us to focus our resources in those areas where there's more volume, there's more shopping activity, and there's also an opportunity to show up on shelves as a new brand and look different and sound different and say different things.
Yeah. Wow, that's what a flip. It's like it's almost like a gold standard playbook from going from idea to get it out there, market validation, differentiation, and then being able to get into all those, retail outlets is incredible. Speaking of distribution, so I know y'all have some great partnerships with like Chris Evans and some other folks. What was kind of like, I guess just walk us through the reasoning behind partnering with some of these bigger entities on the content side, like celebrities and things of that nature, and like how have you been able to track that in terms of success or what that's kind of done for the brand positioning? One big reason why I'm curious too is like it's crazy to see how many, I think like John Legend, Katherine Heigl, like some other big names have like all of a sudden launched their own, pet food brands. And so I'm just curious, like that entire approach, how that worked, the reasoning, just kind of everything behind, launching that aspect of marketing for you guys.
Sure. So Chris started as an investor. So he participated in our Series A just strictly as an investor on the cap table. And once we closed that round, we had sent him some product. And so after his dog Dodger became obsessed with the food, he wanted in a more material way. And he's definitely the kind of dog dad who treats his pup like royalty, and people feel that. Dodger's made really organic appearances through his social content. He adopted this dog while he was on set filming a movie. And so his relationship with Dodger is so beautiful. It's something that we can certainly relate to. And then myself and my co-founders also all have rescue dogs. And so we always have like a little special place in our heart for, dogs that have been adopted who are coming from places, that historically like did not have a lot of love and where they were not priorities in the household. And so our relationship with Chris has been one that has been, I think, really mutually beneficial. He's partnering with a brand that he loves, and we're obviously capitalizing on his commercial appeal and like ability and his relationship with his dog. And he really makes the brand feel human and relatable and full of heart. And you can't deny, the relationship that he has with his dog Dodger. And so it's been an incredible marketing vehicle for us. And Chris kind of complements this world of marketing and creative and assets. And, that face is just, it's really clickable. And so when you look at conversion rates and click-through rates for any asset that Chris is on, he always outperforms and overperforms. And so in that regard, like it makes so much sense to continue to use that recognition as a way to amplify our brand and our message. And he's very much so like a very real user and customer of the brand. And so I always think the people who get marketing right are people who actually use the product, right? Or like actually use the service and can speak to it in detail and in depth. And so that relationship it's been incredible. And, I think he's really happy as an investor. I know he's really happy as a customer. And we continue to think of really creative ways to work together to continue to elevate our message and amplify our message. He's also showing up in retail. And so we usually do these like limited time campaigns in store. And Chris plays a really big role in those, again, for like amplification purposes. And so he's been a pretty critical piece, I would say, of like the success formula for Jinx. And you do see more and more high profiles getting involved in this category for a host of different reasons. I think it's all anchored in love for their pets. But really, I think the ones that are most successful are the ones where, the high profile is just really leaning in and they, they care a lot and it means a lot to them to kind of, show the world their relationship with their pet and why they care so much. And while, Chris and I live very different lives, we still feed our dogs the same thing and we still care about our dogs in the same way. And so I think that's communicated. And I think that's, a really cool aspect of how he engages with Jinx.
Yeah, I feel like pet brands are the new alcohol brands.
Feels that way in some capacity. one thing you've touched on, and it's like kind of blatantly obvious to me because anecdotally speaking, I've experienced this and I have friends that have experienced this, is price point. And like my dogs have tried a billion things, a billion brands, and they actually did really good on raw food. And there's a lot of stuff that comes with raw food, like convenience. We're on the go traveling, doesn't travel well at all. There's a lot of, consideration there. It also is, I don't have, I have like a pit mix that we rescued. Who's like 45 pounds, and I have a pug that we rescued that's like 25 pounds. So we're not dealing in the same weight class as you, but it does add up, right? And it's funny that you're talking about price point, because I think a lot of people try it and do this, even the ones that are expensive. Like I have a friend who has a lab and a dachshund, and like the lab was recently adopted and was going through farmer's dog because like the gut was just not working with whatever he came with. And he was spending $750 a month on his lab. And then he went to go try and switch, right? He was like, all right, I got to switch. I got to find something else. Just like, this is crazy. Spending like almost $10,000 a year just on feeding one of my two dogs. And everything else, like he tried out of convenience. So going to some of these big retails or trying to order something, like upset his stomach. And like, so he like kind of got pigeonholed back into farmer's dog. But I'm like, man, there's probably so many people like this. Cause once you find something that works, and especially like you see your dog is doing well, like it's really hard to then transition and figure out like, who else can I go to and what other players in the space. So I think all that to say is like coming in with that being such a big piece in your entire offering, I think is really, I'm sure it's already paying a lot of dividends now. And I think from what I'm seeing, it's going to pay more dividends, because it's like, now I'm seeing some of these smaller to mid-size raw food companies have just launched freeze-dried raw for a lot of the similar reasons, trying to tackle price point, convenience, all that kind of stuff. And that category is also like just very far behind in terms of mass adoption and stuff. But I think being able to marry the two and really being able to drive price point, especially now with the macroeconomic lens, like you were mentioning, is kind of going to be the linchpin moving forward with dog owners, because it's just, man, the prices just dictate so much in terms of like what you're able to actually commit to. And so it's marrying that price point with, quality product. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see now, learning how many doors you're in and kind of your whole MO on that is, I think that's going to be the key moving forward.
Maybe like the stigma around kibble is very real. And I think it all comes down to, your personal philosophy in terms of like what you want to feed your dog and why. We are really rooted in a nutrition philosophy where like kibble is best because they get everything they need in every single bite. Like even if I did give my dog fresh food, he wouldn't eat the carrots, he wouldn't eat the peas. Like I've literally seen them eat around the things that are good for them. And, with kibble, all of those things, all of those vegetables, all of those superfoods, all of those supplements are in every single bite. And so it comes down to your philosophy. And like we truly believe like kibble results in the best digestibility and retainment of nutrients and the best stool quality, which is like firm and sticky and easy to pick up. And it works for most dogs. When people come to me and they ask like, what should I do or why should I do it? I'm like, it really depends on your dog. I can't tell you how many times I've recommended a brand that I adore and I think is doing it really right that is not my own. Because a dog has a skin condition, or because a dog has a picky palate, or because a dog has a really sensitive tummy. And so for those reasons, like there are some really good solutions out there, but they don't work for everyone. In fact, they don't work for most people. And they're typically really great for condition-specific animals. For animals who are not specifically like in puppy and adult stages, our solution works really, really well for those dogs.
It's funny because it's like, it's the same thing I've seen in the human diet space, right? It's like everyone was touting paleo, everyone was touting, keto, everyone's touting, and it's like on a molecular level, like our biomarkers are all different. Like what works for you, like maybe you do well on high fatty acid foods, and maybe you do well on high carb, so it is like the differentiation and what's best for the human is like, I think we're just now kind of getting to understanding that for the dog, because it's like one of the craziest pit holes you can ever get in is like going down Reddit and like seeing when people are recommending for like dog food. Like I know if you're like on the dog subreddit, like the largest one, like if it's not Wasava recommended, like you get banned from posting. And it's just crazy how people pick such strong lanes when it's like everyone's different. There is a trial and error, and there is what works for you as a consumer, and ultimately what works best for your dog. And I think there's a lot of trouble in that messaging because people are looking peer to peer or like to some brands. And then you have some folks where there's just complete distrust for whatever reason, probably due to largely social media and like vet recommendations and like things like that. So there's just this weird gray space right now where no one, I mean, you could say this across politics, everything right now, where it's like no one knows what's real and what's like feeling like they're being sold by Big Kibble or whatever it is, or like the vets are in on it. So I think that's one of the biggest things I've seen in the space recently, both from a personal experience and also talking to some other folks, is just like that messaging is so muddled and no one really knows who to trust. And I think at the end of the day, like you mentioned, Terry, is like if you see your dog, like the poops are great, right? Like, and they're acting great, coat shinier. I think that's really kind of when it sticks for a lot of people. But getting to that path is gotta be one of the hardest mental hurdles I've witnessed in all of pet ownership.
We could probably do a 3-hour podcast just about that.
Well, I mean, listen, I was going to say, like, if you're, having issues or your dog is having issues, I always suggest that, like, when you can go and you can buy a bunch of different things and try to start eliminating things to see like what might be working better, or combining things to see, if the dog responds in a better way. But I always encourage people to speak to a nutritionist, because vets typically do have back-end relationships with some of these big CPG endorsed brands. And, their education oftentimes is more holistic in nature, where a nutritionist can like ask the right questions and give you much more relevant recommendations. And like, of course, there's a cost to it, but I think like the cost opportunity in speaking to a nutritionist and getting to a closer and faster solution on a tighter timeline is probably going to save you money in the long run, right? Whether it's vet bills or trying food after food after food after food. I was in that latter camp with my dog Blitz, who was like my single point of inspiration for starting the company. It's like I tried thing after every 6 weeks we were like switching food, and he'd itch, or like his ears would turn red, or his breath would smell, or he'd puke, or his poop was really runny. And I was just like, there are thousands of brands in this category. Like, why is there one that cannot work for this dog? And so it was only until we ordered a brand. I won't say it. A fresh food brand. It's one of the big D2C fresh food brands.
Okay.
We ordered a brand. It showed up on our door. I put it in the refrigerator. I fed Blitz his first meal. He got food poisoning because there was some type of contamination exposure. He was in the hospital for 2 days, getting rehydrated intravenously, like then on medication, wouldn't eat for a week. And this was after like he had already been through like a pretty significant back surgery and car accident. And so I was just like really worried. I was like, I can't believe this dog survived this car accident and surgery and rehabilitation. And now he's like the weakest and most vulnerable I've ever seen him because of this really severe food poisoning that happened with one of these big fresh brands. And I think it was then where I was like, okay, there's no more like putting this dog through the ringer with me just trying thing after thing after thing. And so I asked his veterinarian for a recommendation. I spoke to a nutritionist. She gave me like 2 or 3 things to try. And then that worked for a really long period of time until we started the company and I started feeding in Jinx. But that was like the one really big unlock for me, because I had this dog who had a host of health issues. Plus he was super picky, and like food, he wasn't a food motivated dog either. So we just had like nothing going for us. And the nutritionist was the big unlock for him. Not everybody has those kind of dogs, like my 2 dogs now, they'll eat anything, like literally anything you put in their bowl or seems edible that's outside of their bowl. These dogs are happy. Like, they're big dogs. And so it's a totally different, food journey and experience with them. But every dog is different, and I think that you need to do what's best for the dog. And oftentimes that's putting a little extra effort into figuring out, whether it's research or consulting a nutritionist, a little extra effort into doing that in order to get to a quicker solution.
Yeah, we literally just had the same experience. We're just at the tail end of it right now where we feed our dog my Ollie, regular subscription, etc. Again, bankrupts us, but she loves it and it's good for her. But there was a gap in between when the delivery. So I just went and I bought her. No, actually, I didn't buy it. My wife bought I won't say the name, but it's a fresh food company for dogs. And it went south and we had to take her to the vet twice. We spent over $1,000. She was sick for, better half of the last week and a half or two. And we were just like, never again. We're never doing this to her again. This obviously, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm assuming there was a contamination because just, going down like you said, the Reddit rabbit hole and reading about that specific company. So it's just not worth it. And we were just like, we're sticking with, and we do add toppers and stuff, but we're just like, we're not switching again. Like this is, she's been eating this for years. It's good for her. She likes it. That's it. Before we let you go though, I do want to touch on something that you said in the interview that we did last year. And it would be awesome if you could expand on that because I think it's an important part for any entrepreneur or business owner to listen to. When I asked you what are some lessons that you learned when you worked for Casper and Outdoor Voices, you said, do not capitalize, spend your way to growth, and do not capitalize, throw money at problems just because you have a high cash balance in your bank account. So if you could, we have a couple of minutes left, but that would be awesome if you could kind of expand on that.
Sure. So listen, I will start with I am forever grateful for those experiences because one, I ended up working for brands at very early stages that I adored and I was a consumer of. And I loved promoting from a marketing and a growth perspective. But those roles truly were a crash course in startup survival. And to your point, I learned what to do and then more importantly, what not to do. And so I would say the biggest lesson that continues to inform the way that we think about money management within our company is to not throw money at problems and spending your way to growth and then, burning out along the way certainly doesn't get you to where you want to be in terms of final destination and a really positive outcome. But I also saw how powerful it was to build really endearing consumer brands and lead with a heartbeat. And so those are things that I've taken with me. And that playbook has been really core to how we've grown Jinx. And, I would argue one of the biggest kind of success factors and how we've chosen to manage the company. But it's hard, right? Because especially if you're a venture funded startup, cash is aplenty. And so, you do cool things, you say yes to the sexy ideas. And then, as challenges start to introduce themselves, it's very easy to just hire and solve and throw money. But I think, it takes a lot more patience and a lot more maybe clarity to just slow down to speed up. So to really sit and assess a problem and then figure out what is the best way to solve that problem agnostic of what it's going to cost me. And there's human capital and then there's capital. And so I think just considering all of those things and slowing down and truly understanding problems is really important to continue to manage the business in a really effective way and solve things as they come up on a case by case basis. But it's one of the key criteria in hiring also for our company. And I kind of feel like we're kind of getting to maybe a stage or a size where we can no longer claim ourselves a startup. But I always say you have to have a certain skin, for a startup environment. And that requires a lot of grit and a lot of tenacity and a lot of resilience. And I think people with those qualities and are comfortable operating in those environments tend to be the most successful people at our company. And I think, companies within kind of the startup landscape. So for good or for bad, I feel like a lot of those lessons were really necessary before, rolling the dice and becoming an entrepreneur and starting my own company.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, We really appreciate your time today. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for doing the podcast with us. Where can people find you? What are the best, where are you active on social?
Oh, I'm at Terri Rockovich on Instagram. That's really like probably where I'm most active. Since having a kid, much less active. Like just don't necessarily have the time for it like I once did. But yeah, LinkedIn, Instagram, I think those are probably the best places to find me.
Cool. All right, Terri,
Awesome.
thank you so much for your
Thank you,
time today.
Terri.
It was a blast.
Guys, thank you.